From Dragon 360, this is Digital Banter, a podcast focused on modern marketing tactics and driving real business results. And now, here are your hosts, James and Zach.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Digital Banter. I'm Zach. Of course, with me is James.
Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back, indeed. Today we're taking it down to another one of those episodes where we get a little bit more granular into a singular topic, which I think is very important for us to continue to do instead of doing these overarching episodes of multiple things. And then we say, hey, we'll get an episode on this because that's a rabbit hole. And then, well, it may or may not ever happen. So we may actually move down this path of more granular, more topic-based, things that are relevant, and things that we're experiencing in our everyday conversations with clients on a daily, weekly, bi-weekly basis, or even monthly, right? And these are things, and specifically the topic today, I think a lot of people will resonate with. I think this is a conversation that happens a lot internally. I think this is a conversation that happens a lot with vendors and partners and whoever it is, right? At the end of the day, what we're talking about is improving lead quality. And that's a very hard thing to speak on because there's no, again, in marketing, there's no right or wrong way to do this. There's a lot of theories, there's a lot of tactics, and we're going to go through some things that are more strategic that you can do, and then also some things that are more tactically sound of things to improve. As stated, these are just suggestions. These are things that we start with. What works for one may not work for another, and this is not the Bible truth, right, of digital marketing and improving lead quality, but we really wanted to kind of start down that path.
Yeah, so really as we dive into this, like Zach mentioned, it goes into really two things. There's what we're doing from the strategic perspective and what we're doing from the tactical perspective. So to jump into the strategy side, because everything lead quality starts with strategy.
Absolutely.
And there's really two, and this is kind of goes back to a core concept that we talk about all the time from a strategic perspective of whether or not you're focusing on lead gen versus demand gen.
Yep.
Because really honestly, the difference between these two strategies is quality versus quantity.
Mm-hmm.
If your goal as a marketing team is to drive as many leads as possible, and you're doing a lot of UX, gated content, like things where you're trying to essentially trick more people into converting, you're going to get more leads, but the quality of those leads is going to be suspect. And don't get me wrong, there are certain situations where capturing a lot of leads is of value, but it all comes down to, and this is where we'll get into this too, like sales alignment, how those leads are being treated. There's always the question of whether or not we're doing, more nurturing with higher funnel leads. My opinion is nurturing isn't always the answer, but it really does come down to what your strategic viewpoint is as far as what you're trying to drive. So kind of like, dive a little bit deeper into each of those strategies. Like in a lead gen strategy, your goal is to drive as many leads as possible. In a demand gen strategy, marketing's role is more to educate buyers at scale so that they'll come to you when they're ready. So if you're you're educating buyers at scale, you're doing sales at scale, what is going to happen is, you're doing that education up front and you're not relying on the sales team to do that education, which is what you're heavily doing in the lead gen process. So
absolutely.
In lead gen, you're going to have more leads. Again, quality going to be suspect. Demand gen, you're going to have less leads, but hopefully, they're coming to you when they're much closer to making a purchasing decision.
We've shared this principle before, but a lot of kind of the principle behind what leads us in demand gen and what we kind of utilize as kind of an overarching kind of like backstory in our head is the sales team should be turned into order takers. At the end of the day, through a proper demand gen setup, optimization, whatever it may be, right? At the point of them speaking to sales, they should have all the information, minus maybe one or two questions or a couple other items they just want to address. At the end of the day, your sales team should literally just be writing the ticket, going into Salesforce, creating the order, whether you use PandaDoc, whatever it is, right? Whatever the contract terms are. Where with lead gen, what you're doing is it's like, hey, this person's interested. They know nothing about us. Submit a lead form right now. Please be an MQL for us.
Well, think about it. It's like the salespeople. It's like lead gen is almost like cold calling, right? There's just like trying to add an additional layer of warmth so that they can cold call better.
Absolutely.
And then it kind of leaves all of the education and all of the, this is what creates long sales cycles.
Yep.
And ultimately that's where you get like, somebody who downloaded a gated piece of content and then, I don't know, hit whatever key elements to hit your, qualification target in order to get them to reach out. Like all they did was engage with content at that point versus, hey, if somebody like books a demo, they want to talk to you. If somebody says contact sales, those are the types of leads that you're trying to drive in a demand gen strategy versus lead gen. Like I said, if you have a very large sales team and, the more leads, the merrier, and your sales team is very well trained on how to educate and understands that there's a long sales cycle, like the lead gen stuff does work. It's just not quite as effective if you don't have a very large sales team.
Absolutely. If you're talking more of like a standard team of account executives of 10 or less, or even less than that, wouldn't you want them prioritizing the accounts that are ready to buy as opposed to spending their time getting answers or no's, I should say, not answers, but no's on every other phone call, if not way more? I'm not in sales. I don't know what that cold calling rate is, but I know it's high.
Or answering questions that marketing could have answered for them.
Absolutely. How do you save me time and money? When we can answer that. So a lot of what it comes down to, though, James, and you kind of alluded to it, was the alignment between marketing teams and sales teams. Because there's a lot of times where marketing thinks they're being amazing, right? There's been times that the sales team is, so beyond upset and the marketing team doesn't even know it. So I think there's clear alignment that has to happen. And I think for the first part is, it's defining what is a true SQL, MQL, right? MCL, if you want to go down all these acronyms, right? I just tore my MCL, making that joke. But like at the end of the day, both teams have to come to an agreement on what an SQL looks like for the organization. At the end of the day, if that comes down from the C-suite on some level saying this is an SQL, then that needs to stick with both teams. When marketing goes into it and they determine an SQL is someone who has booked a demo or someone who has taken part in some sort of engagement level, or let's just even go down the path of reached a certain lead score, right? But sales team gets on that phone call and they're like, oh, we don't have that much money. We only have like 3 employees. Where's the alignment there, right?
Well, I think a big part of alignment comes from, agreeing on lead metrics, I do think is important, but also having a shared goal and shared objective, which has to be revenue at the end of the day.
For sure.
Because I don't know how many times, and this is like, I don't know, I'll tell you, this is what makes like bad agencies, where agencies will say, oh, we drove this many leads, like we're hands off, like we'll blame the sales team at this point, right? And that's where that whole situation of, hey, we're driving all these leads and you guys aren't closing them. Like, I don't know how many times we've seen that, heard that, or 100%. Whatever. And it's just because the marketing team doesn't care about the quality. The marketing team doesn't do the due diligence to figure out what's happening, right? So like, yeah, everybody can drive more leads by moving up funnel. Like that's very easy to do for almost any business.
Yep.
But it's just, that you have to align on a common revenue target so that marketing's responsible for it, sales is responsible for it, and then they're forced to talk to each other at that point.
Right. And I think that's actually important. I think then also before we kind of get into another aspect of this that I think you just got to real good, is the alignment on the handoff. At what point does it actually become the sales responsibility for this lead? At what point does it go from marketing to sales? And again, that all comes down from having a conversation of, is this person ready to buy? And like we've mentioned before, the order taker idea, right? Is this person ready to buy, or do they have one or two questions that maybe is not best fit for marketing because it could lead to an upsell or exploring a whole nother aspect to the software or service that sales could easily throw in there, right? Sales is good at sales. Well, they should be good at sales. Sometimes they're not, but that's a whole nother conversation. But at the end of the day, there needs to be a clear alignment on at what point does marketing go hands off, and it truly is the sales responsibility. But likewise, on that other side, sales has to be comfortable with that lead to the point where it is a proper time to give it to us. And again, is there a finite lead score? Is there a finite, specific answer to a question that answers that? No, I think every organization that is going to be a tad different, especially depending on how you structure your marketing and sales teams. But, James, is there a finite way that you could define that in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you my opinion. First of all, it's not a lead score by any means, right?
I agree with you there.
And it has to be based on whether or not a customer has raised their hand to the point where they're looking to talk to sales. But I do think, as far as objectives go, in sales and marketing, education is a huge part of what you're doing, whether it's consultative selling via sales or you're doing just like sales at scale. Marketing should try to be answering all of the common objections at scale, where sales should be focusing on the specific scenario by scenario circumstances. And that's where I think there just has to be clear alignment on that. Like, we work with our teams, do like a quarterly sales alignment where we go through common objections to see if there's anything that we can bring forward facing. I think that it's just continuously having that conversation, and also like setting the expectation that like, hey, sales, like, you're not going to, sure, we're doing some lead gen and we're collecting emails so that we can continue to deliver content, build an audience. Like, there's a lot of value in that, but we don't expect you to reach out to those people until they reach out to us and say, hey, like, I don't know, I've been on your email list for however long now. I've engaged with X content. Like, I feel like we're ready to buy.
Absolutely. Right. And that goes back to almost what you were saying, is there needs to be a better feedback loop between sales and marketing, right? Yeah, you can align on all these things, but shared information needs to be frequently discussed, whether that is information on how the leads were the last month or even quarter, right? What are they hearing on these conversations? And likewise, marketing being almost upfront with, hey, here is our strategy for this quarter. Here's how we plan to go about this, right? In the pipeline, you may see some unqualified names and businesses or whatever come in there. Leave them alone. We're going to take care of that, right? Now, if that works the way it is, sure. Hopefully, both parties align on understanding not to outreach to these teams, right? There's a whole nother level to that. But at a different level, the feedback loop needs to be constant, whether that is just leads and supervisors and managers talking, or on some level, there maybe is a quarterly presentation between both. I assume you don't want to hear back on every lead daily. That'd be a lot of information, or potentially just, you wouldn't be able to truly digest that information. But keeping sure that both teams are aligned together. Yes, we've talked about all these alignment goals, but what about getting the raw information, right? The qualitative data, the quantitative data from both teams on how we're moving forward.
The why, like behind lead quality, the why is
absolutely
the most important thing. And that why comes back to just, I guess, like common objections that come up, right? And that's where, like I said, it can be either handled on the marketing side or it could be handled on the sales side. And then, I mean, the other thing, and we'll get into this too, there's always going to be a certain amount of like just junk that comes through. This is digital. We're talking about form submissions in most cases. In one scenario, another, like there is some just technical stuff.
Absolutely. I think we beat this nail on the head, right? Get both teams to align, work together. One team, one dream. Don't hate each other. There's always going to be some quarrels, right? You can't be perfect, but try and get everyone on the same page. But I'd love to kind of go into some of the more common qualification problems. One is the buy-in. And they're not sold on your service software. Maybe they don't understand how it can help them. Another big one is also the people you're talking to don't actually have the authority to make the purchasing decision. Maybe they're told, try and find a piece of software and vet it out. Well, that's just wasting conversations, right? Because then it's potential a salesperson or some other content has to be shared to the next level of people that's already happened. There's a couple other ones, James, I know that you like to tackle quite often.
Yeah, I mean, the top 5 are awareness of the problem. I mean, that's a marketing thing. Buy-in that your solution is the right solution to their problem. Authority to purchase, like you said, and then budget and timeline. Those are the, I don't know, 4 or 5 there. And they can be addressed in different ways. Some are addressed more by sales, some are addressed more by marketing, and we'll kind of walk through each of those. So let's start.
Yeah.
And we're for all of this, I think we're going to take more of the demand gen approach rather than lead gen, just because strategically, I think it is the right way to go if you're concerned about lead quality. So let's start with kind of the common objections of like prospects aren't problem aware. And this comes from, a lot of this kind of really comes from reaching out to people too soon. Reaching out to people too soon, if it is a top of funnel piece of content that they downloaded. The reality is that the whole demand gen versus lead gen strategy should fix this, because this is purely solved with marketing messaging, time, being able to hit that person with the right messaging in the right time and kind of build them up to the point where they are aware. It's solved through messaging and content. Like, this is where the, I'll even call it top of funnel content is very important. You as a business, you're putting out industry level content around the problem that you solve, right?
Yep.
And all of that content is built within what your strategic point of view on that problem is, right? So again, I'll use an example that we work with all the time. All of the attribution software that's out there right now. Some people think that they can solve via technology, and some people think that you can solve via qualitative insights. And whatever your industry point of view is, like, that's kind of what you're putting out there as far as like your content. If it's a technical tracking solution versus a insight solution, like there's 2 clear viewpoints on that. There's actually a lot more than 2. But that's where you are making them problem aware, right? They're both solving for the problem that, I don't know, cookies are going away and tracking is becoming more difficult, but the point of view and the solution to that problem is different. And I feel like that's really done via marketing messaging, making sure that you're putting out that content to your ideal customer and the personas along the way, influencers, decision makers, etc.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, what you're doing is you're creating value through resourceful information that's relevant to your audience. And I think I hit it on the head with, you got to create value. At the end of the day, marketing needs to be inciting that intrinsic value inside of this audience. And that's through messaging. And it's not easy. You're not going to nail it on the head the first time. Well, there's outliers, but odds are it's going to go through a lot of different additions and formatting, and just what information do we need to put out there to really grab the attention. And that could be fast, that could be long-term, but utilizing that data and understanding of what brought you in. And that goes back to the feedback loop, right? What are you hearing on your sales calls? Oh, they loved this specific, what grabbed their attention was this specific ebook. Okay, let's go back and figure it out. They came in about this time. What iteration were we using? And that's just one very basic example of how you can utilize that feedback loop to get into this creating value and understanding where to go from there.
I think a big thing here is like, you have to give before you take, right? Like in any people buy from people that they like, right? The way
Yep.
that you build trust, the way that you become a person that they like or a brand that they like is because they've gotten some value from you initially. And again, with like the lead gen process, you're trying to take before you've given anything, before you've built any sort of relationship, right? Like somebody might be interested in reading your ebook, but they don't know the value of that ebook until actually after they submitted their information. And at that point, I mean, to be honest, maybe your ebook sucked. Maybe they didn't like it. Maybe they read it and was like, oh, this is a sales sheet. I actually don't want to work with these people.
Yep.
It's very important to have good quality content, provide value. That's kind of the key to making people problem aware.
Yep. And I think one of the other, we talked about another qualification issue. It's the buy-in, right? So how do you get people to really buy into your product? One that I'm actually a huge fan of is it's UGC, user-generated content, through case studies, user stories, whether that is through some sort of deck or PDF one-sheeter, or I guess multi-sheeter, or even a landing page for it, or even what I personally love from a paid media perspective, video is king. Having don't have grandma shoot it on her Motorola Razr, but if you have any sort of phone from the last even just 5 years, your camera's decent enough where you could film a case study. I do recommend cleaning it up in some type of editor, but utilizing video as a case study or even a user story, you can use that on your landing pages. I mean, you can utilize that as the actual creative in your paid media format. I don't want to go down that whole path. That's not the point of this. But the point is user-generated content is relatable, especially if it's industry-specific case studies. And we're going back to what we're talking about, industry-level content. Have a case study, have a user story that speaks to what you're putting out to that industry. You may serve a multifaceted level of industries. Having content and case studies and stories for each one of those is going to help, one, build the trust that you need, which in turn is going to help with the buy-in process.
Yeah, creating buy-in just comes down to proof at the end of the day, whether it's social proof proof that your solution is the right solution to the problem. Case studies, user stories, social proof. This is where like trials, demos, live demos, whatever it may be, also comes into as like a major player, because you're showing, again, at this point, prospects want to see the product. And honestly, this is a case where like in most cases, like when you see the product, that's proof that either does what you say it does or doesn't do what it does. I can't tell you how many live demos I've done, and then it's like, oh, well, we really need like these 3 integrations to be successful. Like the core idea of the product is really good, but it doesn't integrate with any of the shit that we use. Social proof, again, I think is huge. Like the word of mouth is still the best form of marketing. Like you're always going to take a recommendation. Most of that happens on social now. There's some really cool, I was listening to Dave Gerhardt's podcast. It was actually an old one. He was interviewing the CMO at Gong, and what Gong did for part of like this, it was really a social proof campaign, is Gong does call tracking recordings. They do a lot more than that. And
it's like sales call analysis almost.
Yeah. If they heard me say they do call tracking, they would probably lose their mind. But essentially, they had Gong recordings of their sales calls, and they were basically recorded all of the aha moments of when the prospect was like, oh shit, like that solves our problem perfectly type thing. Right. And it's like, again, they were able to get all those recordings and they put it out in a campaign, and everybody was, it's a great way to build hype. Gong is a great product so that they're able to do that. It's not that was a really cool campaign idea, but it just shows that you can do, social proof can be more than a user story of
absolutely
how great your product is, or a gated case study, or whatever it may be. But
absolutely,
either way, creating buy-in comes down to, hey, prove that this shit works.
Absolutely. And I think a part of that is also showing the product. And I think this is something that isn't as used and is not as popular right now, or it's utilized behind a gated aspect. But, demos or live demos or free trials, and giving them access to either dummy accounts or maybe a virtual place where they can play around with the software where it really is just a dummy account. They don't even have to download it, right? There's software, there are sites where you can create dummy software and have them play around in it. One, if they want to use a certain feature, and this is what I've seen before, you do have to fill out some sort of aspect. I've seen it before where, before they get access to it, they ask business information so they can tailor the demo to them. And that's an easy way, right? But getting it goes back to this sales principle. And I've technically worked for Best Buy for 4 or 5 years now. Very, 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 and when I say very part-time, I mean about as part-time as an individual can be. It's technically sales. And the big thing that a sales manager that I have at a retail level, it says, get the product in their hand. It builds a kind of emotional connection. And it goes back to, what is a buy-in? Well, it's an emotional or trustworthy connection to your product or service. Yeah, if it's a piece of software, it's kind of hard to, we're not giving out discs and stuff anymore. We're not mailing them the AOL demo discs, but like having a virtual demo or some sort of demo play area where they can put it into their actual business working case, that is going to build that emotional connection and buy-in. And I think we've kind of beat that on the head, right? At the end of the day, put out content, put out different pieces of tools that they can utilize to increase their trust of your brand, service, software, whatever it is.
The only thing I would add to that, though, because I know this is something that we've talked about recently, is, don't give them that demo without any insight in how. If you don't have the training materials of how to use it, or a quick you've seen it in a lot of SaaS products, like the quick walkthrough or whatever. You need that, because the last thing you want to is to give somebody a demo to a product that they have no idea how to use, and then again
they get
going
frustrated.
Back to that most common objection for any SaaS product is, oh, this is too complicated. I don't know how to use it. The resistance to change, right? Oh, this is another tool that I'm going to have to learn how to use. This is another tool that I'm going to have to teach my team how to use. If they don't know how to use it, they're not going to use it. We're not going to get the value, blah, 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 blah. So make sure that they have the appropriate resources too.
Yeah, and going on even that, this is a different type of resource that they need to have, but this goes back to the other qualification issue we can talk about, the authority to purchase. I think this is one that is one of the more common, if not the most common, qualifying issue. A lot of, let's just speak on a paid media perspective, targeting and people searching aren't the ones who make the financial decisions. The financial decision makers are those who have the authority to add on a new piece of software or change something in the organization, have managers or teams in place to vet out products. That's not always the case, but a lot of the time it's going to be your sales manager. I want you to look for a new sales analysis tool. They may look at Gong, get on a demo call, but at the end of the day, all they're doing is vetting it out just to see if it's worth their director or C-suite to get on a call with, let's say, Gong, right? We've already mentioned Gong, down that path. Yeah, you've been spending all this time giving all this content, these videos, these demos to this sales manager, but at the end of the day, he's not the one you're trying to wine and dine, right? You want to get Mr. CRO or VP of sales or whatever to get on the call. And it's not always easy to do that. What are your strategy behind that, James?
Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into this. It starts with having clearly defined ideal customer profile and personas, understanding who the influencers are, decision makers, users. From a marketing perspective, you do want to hit all of those people. I understand from a sales perspective, you may not want to start with users, influencers, and you just only want to focus on decision makers. Reality is that's not going to happen. But again, this also comes down to demand gen versus lead gen. So on a traditional lead gen. What happens in most, complex sales cycles is the users or future users and influencers are really the people doing all of the research. And when it comes down to the decision maker, they're just kind of talking through financials or whatever. Yep. And if you don't create demand with influencers and future users of the product, it's not like you're never going to talk to the decision maker. You're not just going to like start with the decision maker and say, hey, sell this product. And then even on the demand gens, like in a demand gen strategy, it's typically broken down between demand generation activities, which are highly content, highly educational activities, and demand capture. Demand capture, primarily search and retargeting. But I'll use search for this example. So in demand gen activities, you have complete control over who you're targeting. Like you can break down your campaigns by influencers, decision makers, future users, and have, kind of educate all of them in the way that you kind of deliver them the message that you want based on, their part of the decision-making process. In paid search, you have zero control over who's searching. If somebody's searching for call recording software, you have no idea who that person is, what role they have. And for that reason, like if you're only focused on demand capture activities, you're going to have lead quality that's all over the place. Yep. Versus, if you are creating that demand, focusing on the full spectrum of decision-making committee, the hand raisers at the end, as far as the people who are ready to buy, are either going to be like a very high up influencer or the decision maker. So there's going to be a much higher likelihood that you're talking to the right person, if you've helped create that demand, versus again, search is a shot in the dark in most situations.
Absolutely. Right. At the end of the day, buy-in goes more than just getting them to build trust with you. It's also combating that one thing that we've talked about before of people are hesitant to change, especially in larger organizations. It's a lot harder to make change. So if you can get the buy-in from those who are going to be utilizing this on a daily basis, it makes it easier for the C-suite to say, yeah, let's invest in this software. Let's invest in this organizational change, whatever it may be, because they've already got the buy-in from those who are going to use it, which, as you stated, James, anytime you want to implement something on our team, it's hit or miss if we're going to love it or not, right? And so if every time you had it where me and other people on the team are saying, yeah, we love this tool, let's do it, I mean, that makes your job easier because you already have an expectation we're probably going to use this on a daily or not frequent basis. So it's important to not ignore the user, the end user.
It's very rare that decision-making for any sort of SaaS product, tool, B2B solution is a top-down thing. Like
in most cases, in successful cases, yes.
Yeah, it always is, but it's always comes from, hey, the team said that they needed this.
Yep.
Let's vet it out.
Let's figure it out. Absolutely. I think this next one, there's not a whole lot to say. Budget is always going to be, I think, a process. I think it's always going to be an issue in B2B specifically. SaaS software, budget's always an issue. You're working with organizations, all of them at different levels, all of them with different spending and purchasing power. How you can help weed out those who don't have money is, to put it simple, and James and I have said this many times before, transparent pricing, right? Even if you really do build custom solutions, having something that says starting at blank, blank dollars or this much per user, I think that's pretty typical as well, as per user. Having pricing that is upfront, there's no questions about it, besides maybe, hey, I've got an enterprise level situation. Can we work out a deal, right? Having the true dollar figure in front of them will help weed out those who are looking for a potential free solution or a very, very cheap basic solution that at the end of the day, they want something nice, right? They want a Lamborghini but they're going to get a Toyota Camry.
It's not even that. It's like apples versus oranges, right? You want to weed out the people. Like You want to weed out the people that are not even worth having the conversation with. No offense to them, but like, hey, if we start at $10,000 and your budget's $2,000, like at least let them. It's like, let them know, right?
Yep, absolutely.
It's like
one, don't waste your own time trying to sell them. If they don't have the money, they don't have the money.
Yep. And I mean, so again, this is part of it, and I think because this transitions into the next, like budget and timeline, I kind of consider part of the same thing. But again, like demand gen versus lead gen is a big part of it too. Like you can't, if you're running a lead gen strategy and like you have sales like heavily reaching out to, like they can't create budget within an organization, right? Like, so if somebody raises their hand and says they want to talk to you versus you doing somewhat cold outreach and trying to get in front of them, like there's a much higher likelihood that they are going to have the budget for your product. Making that pricing transparent is obviously very helpful in the process. But I think that if you do those two things, like budget should almost never be a question.
I was going to say the timeline aspect really speaks to the strategy you're using, right? Lead gen versus demand gen. And you were just speaking about that, but demand gen, when properly implemented, they are going to reach out when they're ready, right? And lead gen is definitely like, let's just throw shit at a wall and hope they're ready now. So,
I mean, like I said, if you have a large sales team that's able to do marketing, right, then sure, it's okay. But I mean, I don't know how that fits with commission structure. I mean, that has a lot to do with like business strategy.
There's a whole lot of conversations that we won't get into that revolves around. We've talked about. Sorry, please.
Sorry, I was gonna say it comes down to like demand gen is a much more customer centric approach.
Absolutely.
Lead gen, you're forcing a customer journey, and when you force a customer journey, you're also trying to force a timeline, which is like that's a very difficult thing to do. Everybody, like, if somebody doesn't want to buy, the easiest thing to do is say like, oh, now it's not the right time. And then I tell you what the like most annoying thing that salespeople do is like, oh, like what would be a good time for me to reach out in 3 months, 6 months, or blah, 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 blah. And then like you say, oh, I don't know, let's talk about it in 3 months. And then 3 months on the dot, you get a phone call from the sales rep of this person. So I remember about 3 months ago that you said that you were going to be ready to buy in 3 months. And guess what? It's been 3 months. And you're like, yeah, how about this? I'll reach out to you when I'm ready.
Yeah, no, I think that is so typical. I mean, I can tell you, I get those emails and LinkedIn messages all the time too. Like, it's insane the amount of lead gen to, frankly, I'm not qualified to make a purchasing decision at this time, right? It happens all the time. And all you're doing is, I now don't want to work with your company. And
well, this is, I know we talked a little bit about nurturing before.
Yeah.
I feel like this is where nurturing does come in handy, because if you're part of like, I don't know, an email news list, part of a retargeting audience, like all of that is great for people who aren't ready right now, because your sales team doesn't need to be the one that reaches out to them, because that's like a hard sell at that point. But if there's like some sort of like, hey, constant reminder, we still exist, you talk to us one time. When they're ready, if they're still part of that nurturing stream, they're going to get that reminder of like, oh, right, they did have a good solution for this. And that's something that's better done by marketing than sales, because people get annoyed with sales when it comes to nurturing.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've hit the strategic side of things. I want to get into more of like the tactical things, like technically, if you are still getting spammy leads, you've gone through all the strategy. Hey, we have this in place. Now, how do we put that into action? I think there's a couple things that will help on a tactical point of view that, again, they aren't perfect. Not everything is going to work for your organization. It really depends on your audience. The easiest one is qualification forms on your website form, on channel forms, whatever it may be, having qualifiers. That can be as simple Now, if you're talking about very spammy leads, you're getting the people that just type in random bot gibberish. CAPTCHAs, prove you're not a robot. There's millions of them. There's millions of pieces that you can implement. There's different types of them. CAPTCHA is something that, in my opinion, is not the most effective, but it is a good starting point to see if that helps it out. In my opinion, CAPTCHAs are very easy to bypass again on bot aspect or even just not qualified aspects. I mean, anyone can click it. Hell, these bots and robots, whatever you want to call them, are even finding out ways to bypass them. It is what it is. But utilizing things like titles, requiring business emails, not personal emails, right? If you look at LinkedIn, they offer lead gen campaigns. And I'm not saying don't do lead gen campaigns. You want on-channel lead forms, does make it easy. It auto-fills with information. Well, most people have signed up with their LinkedIn profile, most likely with their personal email, or some sort of email at a different level. Maybe it might be, a .edu because they had it in a college class to sign up for LinkedIn, whatever it may be. But requiring a business email, one, will also help you get the company name if that's not a required field, because most likely the ending part of an email, I forget what that's called, the domain of the email is going to be their business. But it also tries to weed out those one-man teams. If it's businessname@gmail.com, odds are they're probably not very big, may not meet your persona. Maybe it does. That could also help you out. Are you speaking to a team that is way too big for what you can handle right now in your organization?
So this one is where I feel like UX people have basically created conflict with marketing,
Yep.
sales, whatever it may be. Because there's and this is true, in the UX CRO world, the less form fields you have, the more form fields you get. But the problem is that you're making it easier to give for, like, in a lot of, again, we'll get into like lead ads in a second, but there's a lot of things that are done now from a UX perspective that makes it easier for somebody to fill out the form.
Absolutely.
So, but at the same time, let's jump into the psychology of it for a second. If you're looking to buy something and you're looking to talk to a salesperson and there's one less form field than another, is that lead really think what is the quality of that individual lead going to be at the end of the day if the addition of a single form field has changed their purchasing decision, right? Like, hey, we're no longer going to fill out this form because they asked for my job title, or they asked for the name of my business, or they wanted my business email rather than my Gmail address, right? Like, if you're not willing to give one of those things, and this is where I will definitely side with salespeople around the whole Gmail, Yahoo thing. If you're not willing to give your legitimate email address, the reality is that lead probably wasn't good.
I do have to say, though, from a vetting standpoint, you don't want to just ignore Gmails, though, as well.
Correct.
And we've ran into that before, where it was an automatic filter on a CRM standpoint, right? And
yeah,
all these leads that could have been qualified that we didn't have this qualifier in place, they submitted via Gmail and they were just thrown out. And it's like, well, we didn't even have a qualifier asking for business email. We made it easy for them to do it. You didn't even take time to vet these out. It was a whole conversation. So it is important that emails that end in @Gmail or @Hotmail or @Yahoo, yeah, I might judge them a little bit with @Hotmail and @Yahoo, but they might still be qualified. So there's other parameters you need to look at too.
Yeah, it depends on whether, if you make business email required, you will fix that issue. The issue, because I know the issue that you're talking about there specifically, if you are taking any email, but then only looking at the business emails, which happens a lot more than you would think, and they just throw out everything else, and why are you even letting them put in a Gmail address?
Yep.
And you're right. A lot of Gmail addresses are very legitimate. Sometimes they are the business email for some organization. I mean, think of it if you're selling to law firms or, some more of like an SMB type format, like, yeah, you have to know who your customer is at the end of the day. But if you're only selling to enterprise organizations where I don't know, expecting a C-level executive to fill it out, I'm giving a very bad example here, but then I think it's a little bit different of a scenario.
Absolutely.
If you're selling to something that's sold to a lot of independent contractors, right? You got to think through your customer a little bit.
And beyond just the email question as well, that you can add to forums, website forums, whatever. Also adding in, if you're a software that serves teams, you're built for large scale organizations, having a qualifier of how many employees do you have? How big is your team? However you want to phrase that, right? And having a qualifier on your end, or even if it's an on-channel lead form, you can set up parameters where they're automatically disqualified based on how they answer this question. If you only serve teams that are 50 people and larger, or 100 and larger, and they answer 50 or less or something like that, there you go. It sends them to a pre-generated message that says, hey, at this time, we're only working with businesses this big. Right? We're not made for a small solution. Maybe you have another solution that is ready for them, and it's like a sister company or something, and throw that out there, and there you go. You helped out your sister organization through whatever, right? I mean, that's just a very odd example, but there's other types of qualifiers you can add in there that will help you understand, is this the right fit for us? And you can even have that conversation with that person through marketing, right? If you're a small team, but you also offer some sort of service that helps them scale their teams, and it's an upsell type thing, well, there you go. Start nurturing those specific people through this other, funnel with information. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways you can take disqualified information and help them along this path. Again, speaking to a very specific aspect, but it's something to get your mind thinking.
Moral of the story here is, don't overthink user experience and just ask for name, email address, and have no qualifying things. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, please don't turn your lead forms into 85 qualifying questions that take 3 separate steps, because just find the happy medium, get the information that you need, and don't be afraid to include it in the form. Don't overthink it.
Absolutely. I think the next biggest one is kind of regionally based spam. I think there is regions that I think most marketers, and I would even say sales teams, know are probably either bot farm or just going to be spammy, but it's also based on culture differences. I think one as well, and we actually had a client bring this to us, and it was a great insight. I think, India, I think that is commonly known to have bot farms, spam farms, whatever you want to call them, and they fill out tons of information. But a client even brought to us that the culture in India is that of they're inquisitive. They always want to know more. So they are more likely to click on an ad, download an ebook. Even if they're not qualified, they're still reading it. It's not always necessarily a bot. And so having this geographic analysis of what happens based on regions, and you can go very top level, right? North America, EMEA, A and Z, all these things, right? Or you can even look at it a country by country basis, what's happening in each. And I'm not saying go to the granular level of each country has their own specific campaign, and maybe that is how you want to do it. I think that's a ton of work. But understanding what is happening in each country or region, and then addressing that specific region.
Well, this is where, and I think a very common thing for global companies based in the U.S. running all of their paid media campaigns out of the U.S. is they do group campaigns by region. So you get like EMEA, APAC, Southeast Asia, all that stuff, right? But the way that these campaigns are structured in a lot of cases is they're grouping all of those campaigns under one umbrella of the region, and not thinking of the regional nuances like within that region and some of the areas that are a little bit more suspicious when it comes to bot farms than others, right? Like,
absolutely.
I mean, I'm just thinking like Nigeria, Philippines, like there are a couple countries that I think are always worth kind of splitting out of that main core, because what happens is it's like, okay, hey, we're running campaigns in Africa, and 95% of our leads are coming from Nigeria. I mean, you have to think about. I mean, part of this comes from like common sense, right? If it's too good to be true, it probably is. And also, like, again, this is where it comes down to actually looking at the data. Okay, where are those? What are those email addresses? Are they all Gmail addresses? Are they all Yahoo? Like, are they legitimate businesses? If you're promoting a webinar, did any single one of them actually show up to the webinar? And I think you'll get your answers really quickly on whether or not the stuff is legit. Should you be wasting time with it? Are you wasting budget on it? Should you be taking a different approach? And you see that. I think that you see that a lot more on like I don't know. It's organic and paid, but use your brain, I think, is really what that one comes down to.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think on another level as well, it's not necessarily that you want to ignore these countries either. Sometimes it does make sense to remove them from your targeting, but there can be value in these countries. What you also have to look at, though, and this is kind of taking a step to the side, right? Budget domination, right? If you get 95% of your leads from Nigeria and it's a super low CPL, the algorithm is going to favor that. So you're not even reaching the high quality people. And that's just how the algorithms work. So that's a whole, again, I said we wouldn't do it. That's a whole nother rabbit hole that we don't need to go down. Because as the next step, and we've been talking about this a little bit, lead ads versus website form submissions. If you're seeing not a lot of quality coming from these on-channel lead gen campaigns, whether that be on LinkedIn or on Facebook, I think those are the two biggest for lead gen campaigns. Maybe do more of a traffic-based or conversion-based aspect on a conversion action happening on the website. That being a website form on the website. In a typical sense, I think James will agree with me here, we do tend to see lower quality leads come from on-channel lead forms. There are outliers, and there are things you can do in your targeting. And if you have really good targeting and you've optimized around this, lead gen forms can work on channel, but more often than not, more lower quality leads tend to come from these on channel. Couldn't tell you the exact ratio, percentage breakouts, whatever. Based purely on experience here.
Yeah, it's different for every brand, but there definitely is a common theme that lead ad form fill typically worse quality than website. I mean, again, it also comes down to pre-qualification again, right? Like those forms are filled out for somebody. It's very easy for them to hit, sure, I'll send my information to this company, versus if somebody has to click through and then fill out the form on your website, there's a lot more intent behind the action that they're taking, and it's typically going to be a higher quality. Again, what you have to weigh out, because at the same time, you get way more quantity from lead ads than you do from that other process, because you're taking the whole landing page experience out, but the quality goes down in a lot of cases pretty significantly. So you kind of have to weigh those options.
Absolutely. And this kind of goes with this kind of, in my opinion, last point. It's a channel analysis, right? Not every channel for paid media is where your audience is going to be. On a prospecting level, odds are in B2B, Facebook is probably not going to bring in your highest quality lead. It might help with, nurture. I don't want to use the word nurturing, but keeping them aware of your company on some level, getting out information at a lower cost. But LinkedIn is most likely going to have a higher quality lead coming through. One, you also might get more information from them from a business standpoint, right? And I'm not going to go through every channel. That's not the point of this. But having an analysis done on what channel is actually driving the higher quality leads. Now, I'll caveat this because, as we've talked about in multiple podcasts, attribution. If there's a channel that really is not attributing to sales at all, sure, that's where you can have that conversation. But if you're noticing that they are seeing you on Facebook first, right, going down the path of engaging with some sort of banner ads, downloading content, and then, eventually they do convert, well, then you can analyze at what stage are they seeing this and utilizing channels in a different way than potentially what you're already using them for. And I think that's a piece that's I think this is an easier piece to control and optimize around than maybe some of the others. Because with adding in a qualification step on a form, you do talk about the potential loss of quantity, which again goes back to the feedback loop. Sales, of course, may not have as many calls to make this month, which goes back to how can we increase this, which could create that cycle, right? There's a lot of nuances there. We're having channels, right? All you're doing is making it easier to understand where your audience is, at what time they're ready to purchase, and where they're coming from. So
I think the big thing with those channels too, like, and we've talked about this before, like the algorithms are built to optimize towards quantity and not quality for any sort of lead gen format. So you might get as many leads on Facebook as you do on LinkedIn for a similar campaign strategy, campaign theme, whatever it may be. And that's where you do have to do the analysis of like, okay, which one of these is actually driving a higher quality user, and then budget accordingly. But the big thing with any sort of channel is like making sure you have that sort of the pre-qualification things in place, like try to pre-qualify them with messaging. If you're having an issue with low quality Facebook, include your pricing in your messaging. Again, probably a very basic example, but there are other things too. Like, oh, do you have this common problem? Like, make sure that your messaging fits the audience and also fits the platform.
Absolutely. And I think that's very important. And also why this goes back to our previous podcast, why, the difference between a vendor and a partner. A partner will look at these items where a vendor may just launch shit and throw it at the wall and launch your ads.
6,000 leads.
Yeah. Great job, guys. But no, I think this has been a good conversation about lead quality and different things strategically and tactically you can do. As you've probably noticed throughout this episode, there's not a one and done answer to fixing lead quality. It is a lot of testing. It's going to take time on your team's end to really drive this in place. Likewise, get multiple teams aligned on how we approach this problem. It's not just a one team is the problem aspect. It typically has aspects from both. So we've appreciated you listening this far. Next week is our 20th episode, which is crazy to think about. We've already been doing this for almost 20 weeks now. So we're so excited to have each and every one of you followers. And thank you so much for listening. Maybe we'll do something big next week. We'll see. Awesome. See you guys later.
Thanks for listening to Digital Banter. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes are uploaded every Friday. In the meantime, keep up with the show by following James and Zach on social media. Links are in the show notes.